Welcome. Today we are bringing you an extensive, comprehensive analysis of one of the most sprawling, complex, and quite frankly, emotionally charged criminal investigations in modern European history. You are about to hear a meticulously documented timeline. And this is a timeline that stretches from the summer of 2016 straight through to the present day.
Right. And our mission today is to explore exactly how a single disappearance triggered what became an 8-year investigative saga. This is a sequence of events involving hundreds of thousands of data points, complex international tracking, and a local community's absolute refusal to give up the search for answers.
Yeah, and to build this timeline for you, we're drawing from a very specific and comprehensive aggregate of sources. We are relying on official police timelines, detailed court reporting, highly researched media documentaries, and factual encyclopedic records. By synthesizing all these materials, we can trace exactly how law enforcement and civilians navigated a case that continually shifted in scope.
Absolutely, because the sheer volume of information the authorities had to process is staggering. And our goal is to help you understand the logistical and forensic realities of managing an investigation of this magnitude. It's not something that happens overnight.
No, not at all. And if we're going to understand the sheer scale of the investigative marathon that followed, we have to start by establishing the baseline of normalcy that was shattered. So we begin with Emilie Meng. She was born on July 31st, 1998. In the summer of 2016, she was a 17-year-old girl living in Korsør, which is a coastal town in Denmark.
Right.
When you look at the demographic and geographic realities of a town like Korsør, what kind of environment are we actually talking about here?
Well, Korsør is essentially a close-knit community where people are highly familiar with their neighbors. It's an environment where the idea of a severe random crime feels exceptionally distant to the residents. It's situated on the coast, heavily defined by its local geography and civic routines. But the events that began there would ultimately rewrite the standards for forensic persistence and civilian mobilization in Denmark. The timeline really begins in the early hours of Sunday, July 10th, 2016.
Right, and the chronology of those first few hours is incredibly critical to everything that follows. We know from the official timelines that Emilie had spent the Saturday evening out with friends in the neighboring town of Slagelse. How did the group navigate their return, and where exactly did the timeline begin to fracture?
At approximately 4 a.m., she and her friends arrived back at Korsør station. And this is a critical geographical point for you to visualize. The train station in Korsør is situated somewhat outside the immediate town center. It's not surrounded by dense residential blocks. It actually requires a bit of a transit to get into the heart of the community.
So it's slightly isolated.
Exactly. And when the group arrived, they parted ways. Emilie made the fateful decision to walk home alone on foot, while her friends took different routes or alternative transportation. The distance she had to cover was a relatively standard walk for a local resident, but she never completed the journey.
Now, in many missing persons cases, the alarm isn't raised immediately, right?
Right.
Especially with teenagers returning from a night out. But there was a very specific detail here that instantly escalated the situation.
Yeah, the disruption to her daily routine was immediate and undeniable. Emilie was expected to sing in a local church choir at 9:30 a.m. that exact same morning. So when 9:30 a.m. arrived and she did not appear, it instantly escalated concerns among her family and the community. This was not a situation where a teenager had simply decided to sleep in or whose whereabouts were ambiguous for a few days. The broken commitment at the church signaled that something was fundamentally wrong, prompting a rapid and severe response.
When you say rapid response, what does that actually look like on the ground? Because we often hear about the critical first 24 to 48 hours. But the scale of what happened next in Korsør seems highly unusual.
Because her absence at the church was entirely out of character, the community and the police did not wait. What followed was a massive civilian and police mobilization. For 168 days, Emilie was officially classified as a missing person. During that nearly 6-month period, the scale of the search was unprecedented for the region. Hundreds of local volunteers physically scoured the landscape.
And we're talking about highly organized efforts, right?
Very organized. They executed systematic grid searches across fields, extensive coastlines, industrial areas, and residential neighborhoods. It was a massive undertaking.
And it extended far beyond just physically walking the fields. The visual campaign was immense.
Absolutely. These volunteers mobilized to hang missing person posters nationwide. During the latter half of 2016, those posters were ubiquitous across public spaces in Denmark. While the physical search was exhaustive, the police were simultaneously running a complex investigative operation. During those first 4 months, they were operating on 3 primary working theories.
Which were?
That she had run away, that she had been involved in an accident, or that she was the victim of a crime.
Managing 3 completely different investigative tracks at once must place an enormous strain on law enforcement. How do they even begin to narrow down suspects without any immediate physical evidence pointing to a specific event?
They have to rely on interrogations, circumstantial tips, and behavioral anomalies. The sources note 2 individuals who were heavily scrutinized during this early phase but ultimately cleared. One was a 33-year-old truck driver, and the other was a 67-year-old man whose house was physically searched by police on 5 separate occasions.
5 separate times. Searching a single residence 5 times indicates a profound level of focus. What does it say about an investigation when police are forced to return to the same property repeatedly like that?
It highlights the extreme difficulty of an investigation operating without a clear physical or digital footprint. When a highly publicized search yields no immediate evidence, it forces investigators to repeatedly revisit the same locations, the same leads, and the same individuals to ensure absolutely nothing was missed. And the psychological toll that takes on a community is immense. You have hundreds of people looking for a 17-year-old girl and absolutely no trace of her. The absence of information becomes a heavy burden.
That period of agonizing uncertainty eventually came to an end, but in the most tragic way possible. If we move the timeline forward to late 2016, specifically Christmas Eve, the entire nature of the investigation shifts. What exactly occurred on December 24?
On December 24, 2016, the missing persons search officially concluded. Emilie's body was discovered in a lake at a location called Riddermarksbæk, situated near Borup in Koch municipality.
Geographically speaking, that is a significant detail. Borup is not Korsør.
Precisely. This location is a significant distance from Korsør station, indicating unequivocally that she had been transported. The immediate police response involved heavily cordoning off the area. This is a critical transition. It moves from a search and rescue operation to the preservation of a severe crime scene. They had to secure the perimeter to preserve any potential forensic evidence from environmental degradation. Simultaneously, they began the arduous process of investigating historical mobile telecommunications traffic from that specific area, aiming to cross-reference it with the cellular data from the area where she initially disappeared.
The public confirmation followed almost immediately. The very next day, on Christmas Day, the police held a press conference. What were the clinical findings released to the public at that point?
The police officially confirmed that Emilie had been the victim of a severe crime. Following a postmortem examination, the clinical findings were released. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The reality of the discovery, occurring precisely during the holiday season, profoundly impacted the public.
You can clearly see that impact in the immediate civic response. Just 2 days later, on December 26, there was a major gathering.
Yes, a memorial service was held at Korsør station. Hundreds of people attended to pay their respects, including Sten Knuth, the mayor of Slagelse municipality, reflecting the deep civic impact of the loss. Following the memorial on December 30, Emilie's family made a public request for the nationwide missing person posters to be taken down. The search was over, and the transition into mourning and the pursuit of justice began. Her funeral was subsequently held on January 19, 2017 at St. Pavel's Church in Korsør, and she was buried in the Korsør Church Cemetery.
While the community was mourning, the police were entering what sounds like a nearly insurmountable phase of data analysis. Let's look at June of 2017. The South Zealand and Lolland Falster police publicized the results of a highly technical examination of surveillance footage from Korsør station. But this wasn't a simple matter of looking at a clear security camera, was it?
Not at all. This is where the technical difficulty of the investigation becomes staggering. The police did not have a high-definition camera pointing directly at the street. They had to painstakingly reconstruct video from an indoor corridor. In this video, there was a faint reflection in a glass pane that showed a view toward the station's car park in the top left corner. They were essentially analyzing a reflection of a reflection.
How does law enforcement even begin to extract usable data from something that degraded?
Because the video quality was so poor, Danish authorities had to send the footage abroad to international experts for advanced enhancement and analysis. After months of painstaking work, those experts managed to identify a bright passenger car driving around the area at approximately 4:07 a.m. on July 10, 2016. They provided an assessment that the vehicle in the reflection was most likely a Hyundai i30, specifically a model manufactured between 2011 and 2016.
Identifying the make and model is a massive breakthrough, but it instantly creates a logistical mountain for the investigators. According to the records, the scope of the police work that followed is difficult to comprehend. What did this investigation actually look like in terms of raw numbers?
By the time they released this information about the Hyundai, investigators had already interrogated roughly 650 people. They had written close to 2,000 official reports. But the most remarkable undertaking was the logistical challenge of comparing approximately 400,000 cars with telecommunications data.
I want to stop and look at the specific number. Comparing 400,000 cars with telecommunications data. What does that actually entail for a police department? How do you even filter a data set that massive?
It is the definition of a needle-in-a-haystack investigation. When police cross-reference 400,000 vehicles in 2017, they first have to pull records from national motor registries for every single vehicle, matching the description of a white 2011 to 2016 Hyundai i30. Then, they must obtain historical cell tower data from the towers covering Korsør station at 4 a.m. on July 10th and the cell towers covering Regmarks Bake on that same day. They have to run algorithms looking for a telephone number that pinged in both locations during the relevant timeframes.
And once they find matching pings, they had to connect those phones back to the cars.
Exactly. They must check if the owner of that specific telephone number also has a registered connection to one of those 400,000 vehicles. It is a monumental task of data filtration, and it is highly complicated by real-world variables. You have individuals who might be driving borrowed cars, corporate vehicles registered to a business rather than an individual, or perpetrators who simply did not have their mobile devices turned on, meaning no cell tower ping was ever registered.
So despite having a specific car model, the sheer volume of data, combined with those real-world variables and the limits of forensic technology at the time, meant the case began to stall. From 2017 to 2022, it transitioned into a cold case. But the authorities didn't stop looking. They showed a willingness to pursue high-profile alternative theories. For example, in 2021, they investigated a connection to Peter Madsen. How did that procedural dead end unfold?
The Peter Madsen lead is a prime example of procedural diligence in a cold case. Madsen is the convicted murderer of Swedish journalist Kim Wall. In 2021, Danish police confiscated and forensically searched a white van that had belonged to him at the time of Emilie's murder in 2016. They were rigorously looking for any possible traces of blood or physical evidence connecting him to the crime. The search was ultimately unsuccessful. However, the fact that authorities were willing to revisit the case with such resources 5 years later demonstrates the enduring priority of the investigation and their commitment to clearing known offenders.
A major factor in keeping that priority high was the relentless public attention. The public simply refused to let the case fade. Over those cold case years, a comprehensive catalog of media projects was produced. We are looking at a 2019 television documentary by TV2 titled, Where Are the Police? Another 2019 documentary series by DR called Emilie Meng, An Investigation Goes Wrong, and a massive 22-episode audio series by BT called The Emilie Meng Mystery that spanned 2019 and 2020.
The media legacy also included a 2020 true crime book titled The Girl Who Disappeared by authors Jesper Vestergaard Larsen and Bo Nordstrom Weil, as well as a 2021 Discovery Plus 4-episode documentary titled Someone Knows Something About Emilie Meng.
When a case is subjected to that level of constant, intense media scrutiny for years, how does it affect the actual police work?
It functions as a complex double-edged sword for law enforcement. On one hand, it keeps a case from going completely cold. It ensures that the public remains vigilant and that potential witnesses who might remember something years later still feel compelled to come forward. On the other hand, it places immense, relentless pressure on authorities. They're operating within the strict confines of forensic reality. They cannot manufacture a match where the science falls short, regardless of how much the public demands an immediate resolution.
Which brings us to April 2023. This is the moment the narrative shifts violently from a cold case investigation to a rapid, highly volatile active situation. We need to look closely at the timeline of a specific 27-hour period to see how the landscape of law enforcement and public technology had changed. Following the constraints of the source material, the victim in this subsequent case will remain anonymous. Set the scene for us on Saturday, April 15, 2023.
At approximately 11:45 a.m. local time, a 13-year-old girl disappears in Korsør, a small village located in the Slagelse municipality. She had just finished a routine delivery of newspapers to the surrounding area. The immediate trigger for concern was the discovery of her bicycle, which was found abandoned. Unlike the slower realization in 2016, the response to this abandoned bicycle was instantaneous.
The technological mobilization was on a completely different scale compared to 7 years prior. What specific assets did the police deploy that very same day?
Coordinating with multiple authorities, they immediately deployed specialized search dogs, aerial drones, and helicopters to secure evidence and sweep the region from the air and the ground. It was an immediate, multi-layered tactical response designed to lock down the area before any potential perpetrator could move out of the region.
But it wasn't just the police who had upgraded their technology. The public's technological landscape had changed significantly since 2016, and that proved to be vital. How did the local citizens contribute to this rapid response?
The role of the public here was paramount. By Sunday morning, the police had already received 600 separate inquiries from local citizens. Because dash cams had become far more prevalent by 2023, among those inquiries were numerous recordings submitted by drivers who had been in the area. One crucial, incredible detail is that police received a dash cam recording captured just 800 meters from the exact location where the 13-year-old's bicycle was found abandoned.
Let's trace the events of that Sunday, April 16, 2023. This is the absolute tipping point. How did the day unfold once they had that influx of public data?
The day began with police cordoning off a local property in the area. By 10:57 a.m., police authorities released a formal statement indicating that they were now working based on the assumption that a crime had been committed. The quiet village of Korsør became the epicenter of intense national media coverage, with reporters descending on the area as the entire country waited for updates. Early in the afternoon, the police announced a press conference scheduled for 3:00 p.m.
But that 3:00 p.m. press conference ended up delivering news that no one expected to happen that quickly. What was the dramatic resolution?
Just before that conference was set to begin, Police Inspector Kim Cliver addressed the media to announce that a 32-year-old man had just been arrested at his residence in Svenstrup, Korsør. Most importantly, he announced that the 13-year-old girl had been found inside that house, alive and conscious. During this operation, 2 other individuals were initially arrested, but were quickly released on the same day after their absolute innocence was established.
You can imagine the wave of national relief. The 13-year-old's mother released a statement writing, "27 hours of nightmare is over, and my dearly beloved is home." The Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, publicly expressed her gratitude to the authorities and the community for their rapid response. Søren Eraldsen, a Norwegian journalist covering the case, summarized the mood by observing, "A country that had held its breath for 27 hours could exhale."
But that exhalation was incredibly brief. The arrest of the 32-year-old in Svenstrup immediately raised procedural and forensic questions that bridged the 2023 case directly back to the 2016 cold case.
Let's look at the legal proceedings that immediately followed. On April 18, 2023, the defendant was arraigned at the Court of Næstved. What were the clinical charges read into the record at that initial hearing?
The initial charges were severe. He was charged with initiating a long-lasting deprivation of liberty, committing violence, making threats of violence, and facing several statutory charges against the 13-year-old. During that initial arraignment, the defendant pleaded partly guilty to the charges.
He was placed in pretrial detention under a strict name ban. For those unfamiliar with the Danish legal system, why is a name ban implemented in a case like this, especially when an arrest has been made so publicly?
A name ban is a standard, legally mandated procedure in serious Danish legal cases to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. In this specific instance, the judge noted that the detention and the name ban were necessary, partly to ensure that no potential co-conspirators were at large. It allows the police to secure all remaining evidence without interference and prevents the public disclosure of details that only the perpetrator and the police would know.
And securing that evidence led to an absolute collision between diligent police work and the advancement of forensic science. Between April 24 and April 26, 2023, law enforcement made 2 breakthrough revelations. Let's look at the first one regarding the vehicle. How does a car from a 2016 cold case in Denmark end up factoring into a 2023 arrest?
The police reported tracking down and seizing a very specific vehicle in Slovakia. It was a white Hyundai i30. This was the exact model and vintage sought by police in the 2016 surveillance video from Korsør station. The defendant had owned this vehicle at the time of Emilie's disappearance and had sold it to a Slovakian family years prior. Authorities managed to trace the international sale through registries, locate the physical car, and impound it for rigorous forensic examination.
The logistics of tracing a vehicle across international borders years after a sale is an incredible feat. But the second revelation from those days was even more staggering. What did the police confirm about the 32-year-old defendant's connection to the original 2016 investigation?
They confirmed that he was actually known to them in 2016. He had been interviewed during the original investigation and was one of the 1,450 individuals who had voluntarily provided a DNA sample to the police at that time.
This raises the most critical question of the entire analysis. If the police had his DNA in their possession since 2016, why wasn't he caught then? Why did it take 7 years and another abduction to make the connection?
The answer lies entirely in the limitations of forensic methodology at the time of the original crime. The DNA sample collected from Emilie's case in 2016 was highly degraded, likely due to environmental factors at the lake where she was discovered. Furthermore, it was a mixed sample, meaning it contained biological material from multiple sources. The laboratory techniques available in 2016 were simply not sensitive or sophisticated enough to isolate a clear, distinct profile from that specific, degraded, mixed sample. They could not establish a definitive, legally sound match with the 4,450 reference samples they had collected.
So the critical evidence was sitting in an evidence locker for 7 years, essentially waiting for the technology to catch up to the truth.
Exactly. The massive advancement in DNA extraction and next-generation sequencing technology by 2023 allowed scientists to do things they couldn't do in 2016. They could now separate out mixed profiles and amplify degraded DNA. Combined with the new, immediate context of the defendant's arrest in the Korsør case, scientists could apply these new methods to the old evidence, finally yielding a definitive result.
With that new forensic certainty, the legal scope of the case expanded dramatically. On April 26, 2023, the South Zealand and Lolland Falster police held another press conference. What were the expanded charges announced against the suspect?
The 32-year-old suspect was officially charged with the murder of Emilie Meng. Furthermore, he was charged with a third, previously unsolved crime, an attempted abduction of a 15-year-old student that had occurred in Korsør in November 2022. The scope of the legal proceedings had now expanded to encompass 3 separate victims across a timeline spanning nearly 7 years.
This brings us to the trial and the final resolution of these interconnected cases, bridging the timeline straight up to the present day. In April 2024, the legal name ban was officially lifted. The defendant was identified publicly as 33-year-old Philip Westh. The trial commenced the following month, in May 2024, at the Næstved courthouse. How did the court proceedings unfold specifically regarding his pleas?
The court proceedings were highly methodical and relied heavily on the accumulated forensic data. Westh made specific admissions regarding the 2023 Korsør case. Clinically detailing his admissions, he pleaded guilty to long-term kidnapping, sexual relationships other than intercourse, illegal coercion, and violence against the 13-year-old girl, who was found bound with plastic strips at his residence. He also admitted to the possession of illicit material.
But he did not admit to all the charges across the 3 cases, did he?
No, he entered pleas of not guilty to several other severe charges. Specifically, he pleaded not guilty to the attempted murder of the 13-year-old, not guilty to the murder of Emilie Meng, and not guilty to the attempted kidnapping of the 15-year-old student in Korsør.
Despite those pleas, the trial concluded in June 2024 with a definitive ruling. What was the court's final verdict and the subsequent sentence?
The court delivered its verdict, finding Philip Westh guilty of the murder of Emilie Meng, as well as the abductions of the 2 other girls. The sentence handed down by the court was life imprisonment. His defense attorney immediately announced an intention to appeal the ruling to a higher court, which is standard procedure in cases carrying a life sentence.
However, that appeal process did not play out as initially expected. How did the legal reality shift as we moved closer to the present day?
In late 2025, Westh officially withdrew his appeal. By voluntarily withdrawing the appeal, the sentence of life imprisonment was cemented, bringing an absolute legal conclusion to the proceedings. The conclusion of this process solidified the case's place in modern investigative history. Just recently, in March 2025, a Netflix documentary entitled A Friend, a Murderer was released, bringing the intricacies of the timeline, the staggering data analysis, and the community's endurance to a global audience. The case now stands as a primary example of how seemingly insurmountable data mountains and severely degraded evidence can eventually be processed to yield a resolution.
We've traced an incredible, expansive arc today. We started on a tragic summer night in 2016 with a 17-year-old girl walking home alone. We moved through an almost incomprehensible data mountain, observing police attempt to cross-reference 400,000 vehicles with telecommunications data. We navigated a deeply agonizing cold case period marked by relentless media pressure and repeated searches. And finally, we detailed a 27-hour community mobilization in 2023 that relied on modern dash cams and rapid police deployment, which ultimately solved 3 distinct cases and brought a long-awaited resolution to a community that never stopped looking.
As we conclude this expensive examination of the timeline, there is a final reflection to consider. The resolution of this sprawling case hinged on 2 very specific physical realities: a white car that had been sitting quietly in Slovakia for years, and a degraded, mixed DNA sample that had been preserved in a police freezer since 2016. Both pieces of evidence held the answers all along, but they required time, logistical determination, and the critical advancement of forensic science to be decoded. It forces us to wonder how many other historical, unsolvable cases currently sitting in evidence lockers around the world are just waiting for the day when technology finally catches up to the truth.
Thanks for listening.